El Huracán Ernesto. Amor y supervivencia en Charleston. The night in Charleston began with a tense calm. The city, situated in the direct path of Hurricane Ernesto, was gripped by palpable unrest. The wind began to whistle, and the first drops of rain hit the windows like small omens of the approaching storm. At 10:37 p.m., a complete blackout enveloped the city in deep darkness, disrupting normality and plunging residents into the most eerie silence they had ever known. Inside a modest home, situated in a quiet neighborhood, the Johnson family gathered in the living room, illuminated only by the dim light of a few candles. Mother Sarah's phone vibrated in her pocket, emitting the shrill sound of an emergency alert. Hurricane Ernesto has changed direction and is heading directly toward Charleston, she read aloud, her voice shaking with a mix of fear and wonder. Impact imminent. Take shelter immediately. Chaos unfolds. Panic gripped the family. Sarah and her husband, Tom, ran to make sure the windows were sealed tight and the small basement was ready to serve as a shelter. But they knew the basement would offer no real safety if the hurricane hit with full force. Tom tried to calm his children, Emily and Jake, ages 16 and 12 respectively, as they sorted through the meager supply of food and water they had managed to secure. It's all empty, Sarah muttered, checking the pantries over and over again for anything else. The supermarkets had been ransacked hours earlier. The city, in its desperation, had exhausted all available resources. Meanwhile, Emily couldn't stop thinking about her boyfriend, Lucas, whom she had last spoken to earlier that afternoon. He was trapped on the other side of town, in an apartment building that was, by all accounts, not prepared to withstand a hurricane of this magnitude. They had said their goodbyes quickly, unsure if they would ever speak again. Fear became a constant in Emily's mind, but she tried to focus on her family's survival. The hurricane's arrival. The wind roared like a crazed demon, pounding against the windows with such fury that it seemed like it would shatter them at any moment. Thunder boomed nearby, and the already dark sky was illuminated by a series of lightning bolts that tore across the horizon. Suddenly, the front door of the house shook violently, and a loud crack indicated that part of the roof was being torn off. "Everyone to the basement now!" Tom shouted, his voice barely audible over the roar of the wind. But just as they began to descend the stairs, an explosion shook the house and the structure began to sway. Water burst into the ground floor with unstoppable force. Walls began to crack and furniture was swept away as if it weighed nothing. With the water rising rapidly, the family was forced to abandon the house. Outside, the storm was a hell of wind, water, and flying debris. The street had turned into a river, and Tom, with a mix of desperation and determination, led his family toward a small inflatable raft he had tied up in the backyard as a last-ditch measure of escape. Sailing into the unknown. With the rain beating down on their faces and the wind roaring in their ears, Tom and Sarah maneuvered the raft with all their might, trying to avoid the objects the wind and water threw at them. Emily hugged her younger brother, Jake, as tears mixed with the rain on her face. She thought of Lucas, wishing with all her might that he was safe, but knowing that what they faced was an unstoppable force. The water kept rising and the raft was dragged toward the unknown. Suddenly, a rumble even more terrifying than the wind shook the earth. An earthquake. The earth shook with a violence Sarah had never felt before. "My God, it's an earthquake!" she exclaimed, clinging to the raft as the water around her began to churn even more violently. But the terror didn't end there. The earthquake generated a tsunami that approached with uncontrollable fury, raising the waters to dangerous levels. The fight to survive. The raft was battered and tossed, and the family struggled to keep it afloat. With each wave, it seemed like the raft would be torn apart. The water was freezing, and the forces of nature showed no signs of letting up. Emily, with tears in her eyes, remembered the last message Lucas had sent her, "I love you no matter what." That phrase echoed in her mind as they battled the waves, her heart broken by the uncertainty of whether she would ever see him again. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the waters began to recede. The raft, shattered but still floating, was dragged toward a small hill, one of the few areas that had not been completely submerged. Exhausted, wet, and shivering, the Johnson family climbed out of the raft, staggering as their legs tried to get used to solid ground again. The devastation surrounding them was unimaginable. Flattened houses, fallen trees, and worst of all, the overwhelming silence of death looming over the town. Sarah saw in the distance what was left of her neighborhood, only ruins with few signs of life. "We made it," Tom murmured, hugging his family with a mix of relief and pain, but his words could not erase the horror of what they had experienced. In the following hours, as they tried to find other survivors, Emily received a call on her phone, which miraculously still worked. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw Lucas' name on the screen. She answered with shaking hands only to hear a stranger's voice. "I'm sorry. Lucas didn't survive. We found his phone in the rubble." The pain she felt at that moment was like nothing she had ever experienced before. The Johnson family had survived Hurricane Ernesto, but the price they paid was high. They lost friends, neighbors, and Emily lost the love of her life. The trauma would follow them forever, and although they made it out alive, they knew their lives would never be the same. Conclusion. Hurricane Ernesto left an indelible mark on Charleston and all those who lived through it. The story of the Johnson family became a symbol of resilience, love, and the unwavering fight to survive in the face of merciless nature. But it was also a reminder of how fragile life is, and how, in an instant, everything can change forever.